isn't playing. It's loaded in brain, but it
I
won't
was just
play.
gonna say I didn't hear. It's weird not hearing it in the beginning.
I
Yeah,
know.
I'll add that to my list of things to do later. Again,
The
but
redo
All
list.
right.
oh my god, the constant list. But we have with us Ken today, and Kathy, I'm loving that you are like, I know a guy who can go even harder on Bigfoot, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, especially since he's been popping up everywhere. Um, in Ohio and others. And I guess what migrating is the theory going on to
Mm-hmm.
more places. So, Ken, how did you get into cryptozoology and Bigfoot?
Well, first off, thank you for having me on your show. It's definitely an honor to be here with you. Appreciate your time. So it's been a lifelong passion of mine. Uh, Kind of giving out a little bit about my age here, but when I was about 8 or 9 years old, well, first of all, I grew up in a very scientific household. My father was a scientist, and my mother was a very adventurous and curious person as well. But I was raised with a lot of exotic pets. My first pet was a little alligator, caiman alligator, and I had collected all kinds of snakes and salamanders and stuff out in the woods. So I loved critters and creatures, and I also loved monster movies. Grew up on Godzilla and Creature from the Black Lagoon and all that good stuff. So when I was about 8 or 9 years old, this would have been, I think, the latter part of 1975. I was watching a TV show, and the story came on about Bigfoot, and I was just completely enthralled. You know, they showed the famous film clip from 1967, which was actually filmed a week after I was born. So that was kind of interesting to me, and the casts of footprints, big footprints made out of plaster and stuff. So I just, I thought this thing, if it really existed, it seemed like both a monster and also some kind of animal that was running around in the woods that hadn't been discovered yet. So that kind of started my journey. So from a young age, I was, reading everything I could on the subject. And then my mother was a huge influence, and she was very encouraging of my interest. And in fact, when I was about 15 years old, she arranged for me to go to Loch Ness in Scotland and do field research on the Loch Ness monster at a young age. So it's just been a lifelong passion of mine. Never planned on making a career out of it. I've just been very blessed, and hooked up with the right people in terms of other researchers that I respected, and then ultimately I started writing books and appearing on TV shows and stuff, and it's just been a really incredible, interesting pursuit.
I love that
Mm-hmm.
your mom is like, go investigate Loch Ness and enjoy. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome.
And that was pretty cool.
Well, and I can see why you get along with my husband Greg as well as you do, because you two almost sound alike with the things that you like. I mean, he was the same way at a young age. It was the monster movies and reading all about cryptids and all of that stuff. So, he actually introduced me to you because of his knowledge with those cryptids and
Hmm.
some of the shows you've been on and the books that you've written and everything. And I think you have amazing stories to tell. And I think one of the ones we kind of want to talk about, since it's Bigfoot month, is maybe
Hmm.
begin with some of things that have happened as far as Bigfoot with you.
Well, I've been doing field research, for decades. What I tell people is that I've been in pretty much every alleged active area across North America, from Alaska to the Pacific Northwest, uh, the Appalachians, the Midwest, all the famous hot spots that people have heard about: Bluff Creek, Area X, Monster Central, and so forth. I've even done research down into Central America. A lot of people aren't are aware of the fact that Bigfoot, Sasquatch reports extend throughout Mexico and down into Central and South America as well. I've never seen one in all those years of research. I'm convinced I've heard and recorded vocalizations a few different times in different locations. And I guess what people always want to know is what the most exciting or dramatic experience that I had. That would have been on August 18th, 2003. I was at a place called Cottonwood Lake in Texas, where there had just been reports of a Bigfoot. I was there with some other researchers doing an investigation. And just after sundown, it's a very remote area, this little lake in the middle of nowhere. Just after sundown, we were hiking around the lake, and suddenly we heard something grunting at us from the brush. We couldn't see what it was. I had a recorder going, and it sounded like an ape to me. It actually sounded very similar to howler monkeys, which I've heard in Central and South America, just like a big primate grunting sound. Very loud, very deep. And we all kind of looked at each other immediately, and we're dropping a lot of F-bombs because we didn't know what this thing was. We all grew up in Texas, in the woods of Texas, outdoorsmen, and this didn't sound like any animal we were familiar with. So at first we attempted to flush it out, which involved one of my colleagues, very brave guy named Chester Moore, got on his belly with a shotgun and started crawling through the brush trying to flush it out. I don't know what we would have done. I guess I had a camcorder, so I would have tried to film it or something. That didn't work, or he got his wits about him and came back out and said, I'm on my belly. It's very vulnerable. And, this thing sounds pretty big and scary. So we went up to a levee overlooking the lake and had a spotlight, and we shined that down, and we did see some eye shine, something seemed very high off the ground. Not the red eye shine that many people have described. This is more of just a standard yellowish green eye shine that you see from most nocturnal animals. And then we went back down and set up camp and nearby. And throughout the night, we heard other sounds. It moved around the lake, but it was more like it turned into kind of a wailing sound. Very similar to, there's a recording called the Ohio Howl that was recorded in 1994 in eastern Ohio that's pretty well known. And then the following morning, finally the vocalization stopped. And then the following morning, we were able to make our way through the brush where we had heard this thing, finally, in the daylight. And there was a little beach. And on the beach, there were deep human-like footprints. And a number of large turtles had been torn in half, top to bottom, just halved. And there was no flesh or anything left. The turtle shells were just kind of left there in a pile, which to me is, there's no animal that I'm familiar with that has the dexterity and strength to rip a turtle in half. So that was probably the most dramatic thing that I experienced that nighttime. And the following morning, that convinced me at least that, there's got to be something to this. These things have to be real, So, but I've interviewed, hundreds of people throughout the years that seem very credible and sincere, that claim that they've encountered these things. So,
yeah, I've seen you on a lot of the different Bigfoot, I should say cryptid shows and everything. And you've been very fortunate to be able to talk to all of these witnesses, which is pretty cool, because just like you've been investigating for years, but you've never actually seen one. And that seems to be the case so often when it's in regards to Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I put myself in good company. I mean, there were the pioneers of the Bigfoot field started back in the 1950s, and there were guys like Rene DeHinden, John Green, Bob Titmus. I mean, there were guys that spent 30, 40, 60 years researching. None of them ever had a sighting, even though they were passionately doing it. So I think it's, right place, right time. Based on what I just told you, I'm convinced that these things are very rare. I think there may only be a few thousand Bigfoots or Sasquatches spread across the continent. So it's, you're like 150 times more likely to see a bear than a Bigfoot. People that have seen them, I think they're, probably very, very lucky to have been in those situations, although those sightings are sometimes traumatic when people do see these things. I'm a little skeptical, as I think all researchers should be, in terms of, people contact me and say, well, I've had, 7 sightings across 4 states, and that's, well, how come I haven't, so that kind of, bothers me a little bit when people claim to have had excessive sightings or experiences with these things. But who knows? I mean, it's a mystery, and I guess some people may be in areas that are more active or more there's also levels of confirmation bias and things that other people may experience that, may sway their opinions. But
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to be people who don't want to necessarily run into them or have an experience out minding their own business are the ones who have these run-ins. And, the scientists are like, let's go find. And he's like, no, I'm not talking to you today.
Kind of like alien encounters, right? Like,
Do you think Bigfoot is like interdimensional, going through like portals, if you will, and that's what can make him kind of hard to track down? Because we haven't found any bodies or anything like that. It's footprints, right? And just personal encounters. So, do you think they could be interdimensional, making it hard to find, or?
Well, certainly that's a hot topic and a very divisive, polarizing idea within the Bigfoot field. Many people ask me about that. I haven't seen any evidence that they're interdimensional. I haven't, obviously I said I haven't had any sightings. I haven't seen trackways that stop in the middle of nowhere and some of those things. I've spoken to people that claim they've had kind of weird Bigfoot experiences on the kind of extreme edges. And I know a couple of researchers like Stan Gordon in Pennsylvania, Ron Moorhead in California, that have been investigating for decades. And they're convinced that Bigfoot is some type of interdimensional or extraterrestrial thing. I haven't seen the evidence of it. And I think the vast majority, if you really delve into Bigfoot sightings, I think about 97% of them can be explained by a flesh and blood animal. It's usually seen running across a road at night, or it's in the woods hiding behind a tree, or moving up a hill. The people that describe Sasquatches, Bigfoots cloaking and vanishing and telepathically mind speaking with them really only comprise about 3% of the reported accounts. And that's based on there were a couple of kind of, you guys are comfortable with the term woo-woo, so we'll say there were a couple of woo-woo authors, researchers in England named Janet and Colin Board, who wrote a book years ago, and they did a survey, and even they were like, well, there's only a very small percentage of these accounts are really interdimensional. Now, in terms of your other question, which is a really great question, and I dedicate a chapter in my book on Bigfoot to this question, where are the remains? It seems like even if these animals were very rare, that they're big, and eventually you think someone would have stumbled across a body or a bone or a tooth or something that would be conclusive, and we haven't found that. So that is a great question. It's a great skeptical question. Why haven't we got physical remains at this point? The only thing I can say is that they are probably very rare. They live typically in areas that are very moist with acidic soil, which tends to decompose remains quickly. The remains of even large animals will often vanish pretty quickly in these types of environments. And also fossilization, which is a rare thing anyways. If you're thinking about a fossilized Bigfoot bone, then that would be pretty rare also. But there's an interesting idea that they may bury their own dead. And we don't, I don't know if there is I don't think they're as intelligent as humans, for example. They probably about, half our intelligence at most, but still, there was an interesting discovery in Africa in 2013 in a place called the Rising Star Cave, the cradle of humankind, where a lot of fossil hominins, human-like forms, have been uncovered. There was a species discovered called Homo naledi. And the bones of 15 individuals of this species, which was basically like a Sasquatch type thing, very small brain size, very ancient, hairy, presumably hairy, archaic features, basically an upright walking ape type thing. The remains of 15 individuals had been placed carefully in this hidden chamber in a cave. And scientists have determined that the bones weren't carried there by carnivore predators. They didn't wash in there in a flood. They seemingly were deliberately placed there. So that's kind of a compelling evidence that even primitive hominins with small brains may have buried their own dead or hidden the remains of their dead. So, it's all speculation, but isn't that an interesting idea that maybe these things are capable of, for whatever reason, if they are able to find the remains of their dead, that they hide them or bury them or somehow. And the last thing I'll say is that I know this is kind of an extended rambling answer, but in terms of interdimensional, why would something from another dimension look like something that evolved on our planet? For example, everyone can agree that Bigfoot's hairy, right? Well, hair is an adaptation that has evolved specifically because of the pressures on planet Earth over 300 million years, starting with early primitive Jurassic dinosaurs and things. And it's an adaptation for thermoregulation, right? We keep ourselves warm because animals that have warm blood are typically covered in feathers or fur. Why would something from another dimension look like something that evolved on our planet? That's kind of, to me, that's a bit of a stretch. I know that we really don't know about other dimensions in the first place. So it looks just like something that should have evolved on our planet. So I don't see any argument in terms of why something from another dimension would look like an animal from our planet. So.
That's interesting. I've never looked at it that way, but it does make sense. But then again, and here I go with my off the chart type of thinking. What if they're smart enough? Obviously they're very smart. What if they came back in time at one point and that's what they remember was what we've evolved from, and they return that way because they still think we're that way. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. There's lots of ideas out there, and I see a good question in the chat room. They must be pretty smart. Now, this is interesting because I talked about intelligence a moment ago. The shape of their heads indicates they don't have necessarily a big brain. People typically describe a very sloping forehead with a kind of a peak at the end, which is indicative of a smaller brain. But intelligence in the animal kingdom can be displayed in different ways in terms of adaptations. So, for example, with regard to Bigfoot or Sasquatch, I'm of the opinion that they have adapted behavior patterns specifically to avoid us. They recognize that we, Homo sapiens, are very dangerous, really the only threat that they face on our planet. They're apex predators, but we have guns and things and we can probably wipe them out. So in that sense, they may have adapted behavior patterns, which I refer to as avoidance behaviors, to avoid us. And that means that they live in the most remote areas of the woods where we don't go. They may bury their dead. They typically move away from us very quickly. They may be very keen hearing, smell, whatever senses they use to avoid human contact. And many people have reported that they've seen them like peeking out from behind trees or kind of remaining very still. So, this could indicate a kind of intelligence. I guess you could make an argument that they recognize that they don't want to be found by us. And so that makes it, specifically hard to find them.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a few different types of shows on TV, specifically the Travel Channel, which, side tangent, why do they still call it the Travel Channel when it seems to be all paranormal and woo-woo? But I digress. And a good number of the people that are having, lucky, unlucky encounters with Bigfoot were people who either were out hiking in, kind of off the beaten trail, and or they bought new property to get away from everyone. They're the people of get off my lawn. And, the house is very surrounded by wilderness. And, it made me kind of wonder, with these interactions and maybe accidental sightings, then if Bigfoot is trying to avoid us, like Bigfoot's minding their own business and here's this new house and oh crap, like we entered their territory,
Sure.
like, well, I'll just ask the Bigfoot guy. Are we, humans, right? We're running amok in Mother Nature. So do you think that could be a good chunk of some of these sightings is our urban development taking over nature, or
Solar panels
Yeah.
taking over Sasquatch territory.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. The vast majority of Bigfoot sightings are of single individuals. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not another one hanging around in the same area, but typically people only see one of these things at a time. One hypothesis is that the ones that are being seen mostly are younger ones that maybe aren't as, experienced at, doing what they're supposed to be doing. We all know that teenagers, for example, will often be a little rebellious and do things they're not supposed to be. And also, if we follow in primatology, there's something called the Noyau social structure, which is used by orangutans. Orangutans, typically, there's one male, alpha male, that has a huge habitat that he ranges, roams, and then he has interactions with different females in that area. And so if Bigfoots perhaps would follow a similar social structure, then the males are going to be moving around more, trying to find females or whatever. And, that could be why they're seen, when they're moving into areas that are, atypical or unexpected or whatever. And you're right. A lot of people that have the most sightings or at least activity in their area sometimes live in these remote areas on the edge of the wilderness. And because there is so much deforestation and habitat loss going on, we could be basically, moving into more and more into their territory, pushing them back into more remote areas, but also having more kind of accidental encounters with them because we're kind of, tearing the woods down and stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think Bigfoot is more closely related to human or primate? Or is he kind of like that one of those missing links in the middle if we want to get into Darwin and genetics?
Yeah, for sure. If we look at the archetypical Sasquatch, and there have been analytical studies done on eyewitness reports and descriptions since the 1970s to the 1990s, the average Sasquatch is described as being about 7.5 feet tall, estimated. These are height estimates, probably based on the mass and the size, weigh anywhere from 500 to 1,000 pounds. So they're big animals. Most eyewitnesses described, as I said, that the head, they kind of slopes back quickly, the forehead with kind of a cone or a peak on the back. And then they have seemingly very broad shoulders, and the neck just kind of sits on top of actually, they have a neck, but their muscles around their head and their shoulders are so massive that they appear to have a kind of a head right on top of neck. Very powerfully built, mostly covered in hair, 2 to 4 inches long. There are some hairless parts of their bodies, the palms of their hands and the soles of their feet or parts of their face, but they're basically covered in hair, very powerful, walk upright, long arms. So this would indicate not a human at all. I mean, humans don't have really any of those features. Humans aren't over 7 feet tall, typically, very rare, not covered in hair, and don't have that muscular skeletal thing with the sloping forehead. So it very much resembles fossil hominins. And again, hominins includes all of the great apes, right? Including humans and things that lived in the past. It seems to resemble most hominins that evolved in Africa around 2 million years ago, which had a brain capacity about half of ours. They looked very much like apes, but they were all habitual, upright, bipedal walkers. They evolved starting around 3 or 4 million years ago. Hominins began to walk. Some hominins began to walk completely upright and on their hind legs. So it seems to match, the physical descriptions seem to match things that evolved about 2 million years ago in Africa. So the prevalent theory among, quote unquote apers like myself, think that something has survived, some of these ancient hominins, perhaps something like a Paranthropus boisei is one species that's mentioned. Looked just like Bigfoot. It was just shorter. Maybe something like this survived into modern times, and that they did evolve and get bigger over time, perhaps during the Ice Age, and that there's just a very small population of these things around. In terms of what it means to be human, I personally identify from a cultural perspective, human means, language, the ability to art, religious ceremonies, culture, things like that kind of define to me Homo sapiens are human. Even the Neanderthals had, perhaps ritualistic burials, and they made jewelry and things like that. So there's no evidence that Bigfoot uses fire tools or any of those things. So in terms of cultural observation, it seems to be something very primitive from about 2 million years ago. That would be my best guess.
Yeah, just the whole quick statement that you did that like we don't know him or Bigfoot to use fire. So I wouldn't have even thought of that, to know like Bigfoot's out there cooking what he's catching, he's out there fishing and now he's going to cook, his meals. So I haven't even thought of that. Um, have there been any sort of remains found of any meals that they may have eaten? I know you mentioned before that those turtles were ripped in half and those poor turtles, but do we have any clue of what like their preferred type of food might be?
Well, based on eyewitness reports, they seem to be generalist omnivores, very similar to bears. And it makes sense because if you consider an animal as big as I just mentioned, a warm-blooded animal that moves around a lot, that weighs 500 to 1,000 pounds, needs about 10,000 calories a day. So there have been observations of them eating everything from bushes and roots and vegetation to berries to fish, mollusks, dead animals like carrion and different things like that. So it's just like a bear's diet. They would eat pretty much the same types of things, pretty much anything. There have even been accounts of them like rummaging through people's garbage dumps, trash cans and garbage dumpsters, just like bears do as well. So there have been, in addition to the footprints and the physical trace evidence, castings of footprints, knuckle prints, handprints, and even a butt print, believe it or not. There's also been some hair samples that have been found that have not been DNA identified per se, because that's a very difficult thing with hair, but that seem to be not to match any known animal or human. There have been some droppings found that have been known to contain parasites that are not identifiable with any known species. So none of that is obviously conclusive to the scientific world, which needs a pretty big, when you're making a claim like something about Bigfoot exists, that you'd better have a body or a bone or a tooth. At this point, photographs don't work, footprint casts don't work, and none of this is really very convincing to them. But I would like to circle back to one point you just made, and this has kind of made me unpopular to a lot of people in the Bigfoot world, but you have to be a good researcher in any of these fields. I think Bigfoot, cryptids, paranormal, I think you have to really study a lot of psychology and sociology, and you have to understand that humans' brains are very complex and very misunderstood. Even neuroscientists will tell you there's a lot we don't know about how this thing works, right? So there's a lot of confirmation bias throughout the paranormal field. And you guys probably encounter this in different realms of paranormal and what people's belief systems are. Confirmation bias involves your belief systems, your core beliefs, and things that you've kind of grown up with or been influenced by. Within the Bigfoot field, there are apers like myself that are typically, Bigfoot is an upright ape, hominin. We're typically come from very scientific, rigid backgrounds. We're open-minded, perhaps, but we lean heavily on science and zoology. The people that look at Bigfoot as an interdimensional being, many of them I've talked to are very spiritual people that come from either the paranormal field or the UFO field, and so they have kind of this more of an idea that the world has kind of these different dimensions and realities and veils and things that you can move beyond. And I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm just saying that's kind of the influence of those people. And then within the Bigfoot field, there are also kind of the Bigfoot is a human, some type of human. And I have some colleagues like that say, they have very human-like faces and they do these human-like things. And what would the confirmation bias be in that situation? Well, this is kind of maybe a silly answer, but my view on it is that these people tend to want to think that they can somehow become friends with Bigfoot. And they can connect with Bigfoot on it. Well, if it's a person, a type of hairy person out there, maybe I can establish a contact and a relationship and that type of thing. And we have people in the Bigfoot field known as habituators that claim that they are in daily contact with the Sasquatch forest people, as they call them, and that they bring them gifts and give them food. And so they've out of all the millions of people on Earth, they are the ones that Bigfoot has chosen to be a friend with, So I don't know. All this stuff is fascinating to me, and I know it kind of irks a lot of people because they think I'm questioning their belief systems, but I'm really just saying, hey, we have to acknowledge that all of us have different biases that kind of affect the filter or the lens that we look at
Mhm.
Bigfoot through.
Yeah, I would agree with that, what you're talking about. And it's very interesting to hear that perspective and everything, because I never thought about that. Because especially when you first started talking about the spirituality side of it, and that the the belief system of it could be interdimensional, and the veil and stuff. That makes sense. It all makes sense, and yeah, I'm sure people, you know, question you when you point these things out just like they do with everything. However, I find it fascinating to see all aspects, to see what everyone's thoughts are, and because what my belief is may be totally off as to what it could be. So why not open up your mind and hear all of these other things that it could be? I really liked what you had to say there. I really liked that a lot.
Thank you. And to be clear, I'm very open-minded to the paranormal. I've seen a
Mhm.
UFO, a black triangle flying over
Oh,
Charles
cool.
Mill Lake near Mansfield back in 25 years ago. Not saying it was aliens, but I saw a UFO. I've tagged
Yeah.
along on ghost hunts and I've seen doors slam by themselves and things like that. So I am an open-minded person
Right.
with regard to all of these unexplained phenomenon. I just don't see necessarily a need to connect these things. And again, recognizing human psychology, there's something called patternicity or apophenia, which is a subconscious condition that many of us or all of us have, where we want to connect things in life. It's important for us to find connections between things. And so for people that have these certain biases, it's probably easier for them to find a connection between Bigfoot and the paranormal or UFOs, because that's kind of just their tendency is to want to find those connections. So but I'm
Mhm.
open-minded to the paranormal as well. I just don't think it has anything to do with Bigfoot. It may have things to do with other cryptids that I've investigated. Definitely seem more paranormal in nature.
Mhm. Mhm. I have a question. The Patterson Gremlin, am I saying that right?
Gimlin,
Gimlin
Gimlin.
film. What's your thoughts on that film?
Well, I've been convinced by it since I first saw it at age 8 or 9, and I've looked at it
Mhm.
hundreds of times. I've gotten to know Bob Gimlin over the past 20 years, 22 years. He's still around. Roger Patterson died in 72. I don't think a costume, I mean, that thing has so much detail in terms of what you see in muscle masses and adipose tissues, and the way that it walks, which is an unhuman compliant gait. So I've been convinced by it for pretty much my whole Bigfoot career. Now, obviously, there's a recent controversy where it's now being claimed that there is definitive proof that it was a hoax and that it was a person in a costume. I haven't seen that new found footage that's being touted, that's going to be in this new documentary capturing Bigfoot. So until I see that film, which purports to show the same Bigfoot being staged in kind of a practice run, if I when I see that film, and I'm anxious to see it, if the costume does look the same or close enough to what we see in the Patterson Gimlin film, then I would have to acknowledge that it probably was a hoax at this point, because there's no other, that's what it boils down to. Um, but for now, I'm still fairly convinced that it could be a genuine Sasquatch based on years of research. But
Mhm.
like all alleged evidence in any field of the unexplained, you have to be willing to accept new evidence and new data. So
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
could
and I
change.
I do agree with you on what your thought is. I don't think it was hoaxed. But it'd be interesting to see, just like you said, it's interesting to see what they have to say, because living with my husband that loves this stuff, he has pointed out all of the things that you just said too, and I look at it as real. I mean, he even pointed out that in this film, Bigfoot has breasts. And why would, if somebody was hoaxing something, why would they even put breasts on Bigfoot like that?
Well, that's a great point, and I've always thought that the breasts looked very natural when she
Mhm.
turns and looks at the camera. They seem to have a very natural appearance to them. Um, But what a lot of people aren't familiar with is that Roger Patterson, who took the film, actually did investigate a couple of famous Bigfoot sightings from back in the 1920s and 50s, where people specifically described female Bigfoots or Sasquatches with noticeable breasts. And in fact, Patterson even sketched Bigfoots with breasts prior to making the film in 1967. So there have been
Interesting.
reports of Bigfoots with, so he may have, if he had chosen to hoax a Sasquatch, he may have actually referred to some of those famous sightings that he had investigated prior that described a female with breasts, but still doesn't explain how, two broke rodeo cowboys from Yakima, Washington, with very little money, managed to put together this incredible costume with that level of detail. That's what's really throwing everybody off, is that, how could these guys have pulled that off? If you've watched TV shows where they've tried to reproduce that film a couple of times, it always looks really terrible. And now they're using like top Hollywood special effects guys, from 60 years later, are still having trouble kind of creating such a realistic Sasquatch. At least that's my take on it. So
Yeah, I opened up a couple tabs just looking to see what kind of cosplay and costumes are available for Bigfoot right now. And a good majority of them look pretty horrible. Um, Clearly a fake costume. There is one out there that's about $600 that has the most real looking type of like face and everything, but even the hair on it isn't quite right. But so if it's $600 now, with inflation, who knows what it would have been, something, but that's with today's special effects, costume, abilities and, tools to make such a thing. So I'm on the fence about the film. I will joke and say, Bigfoot had a pretty nice pimp swagger in that film, but I'm open-minded about anything. I don't know enough to have an opinion on Bigfoot. I like to hear all the theories, but um, to say that was a costume and an absolute fake, like there's not even a good costume today that can pull it off. And we have great AI images of, and the Bigfoot in AI right now looks like the one that I'm like, oh, his name is Daryl from, what was it, a car commercial or a Slim Jim commercial, being replicated everywhere else. So it's not even one that looks like that film. So
yeah, if
uh,
it was a costume, then Patterson was a genius. I mean, and there are arguments to be made. He was an artistic guy. He was an inventor, but he was obsessed with Bigfoot. But it's still, I don't know. It still just seems like there's so much that you can dissect in that film, especially now with technology where you can stabilize it and do image enhancements and things like that, where you say, man, that this looks too good. I mean, it can't be a costume. So that's, that at least for the advocates. And I will say this also, this has been a very hot topic in the Bigfoot field in recent weeks, obviously. I've been keeping a scoreboard in terms of the veteran researchers and the people that are really full-time researchers in this. And really, out of about 14, only about 1 in 14 researchers has, changed their opinion in terms of saying, okay, well, I think it is a hoax, or maybe it's a hoax. Pretty much all the old guard Bigfoot researchers are still like, no way. It's like, it's real. So I don't even know, even when this new documentary comes out, I don't know if it's going to have much of an impact in terms of people that are hardcore Bigfooters are really going to change their opinion on the film. I think they're still going to support it. So
I was just looking at the time and I'm like, how much longer do we have to pick Ken's brain? Um, now you've mentioned the film. What shows, if any of our friends online wanted to see some of your work, where can they go find your books, what shows you've been on, besides, like you'll be at Parapsychon, so the Ohio people can come see you at Parapsychon. But right.
yeah, looking forward to that. It's going to be a great time. Thank you for asking. I'm currently on, most frequently, I'm on a television show called The Proof is Out There, which is on History Channel on, you know, Friday nights, usually 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 Central. I'm on a lot of those episodes dissecting alleged videos and films of different cryptids and creatures. I'm also occasionally appearing on episodes of The Unexplained and Ancient Aliens and some of those, mostly on History Channel. People can find my books on Amazon.com, or if they go to my Patreon site, Exploring Cryptozoology, they can find links to my books. And also, I teach an online cryptozoology course. So if people want to really go on deep dives into any of these subjects, I do that online as well. And I also have a website, which is just kengerhard.com.
Okay. I'm debating, like, should I mention the title of this one show? It is on travel, and people have a lot of spooky happenings where lots of trees are abundant. Have you seen that particular show? Because I swear 98% of every encounter where there's a bunch of trees, it is almost always Bigfoot. And there have been instances of Bigfoot like knocking on the sides of house, but yet he's not smart enough to break a window or yank open a door. And I'm like, if he's smart enough to follow you up to the house and bang on the wall, why isn't he banging on that glass? Because I'm sure he could break it if he wanted to really come and get at you.
He wanted to him.
Yeah, I'm like, really?
Are we talking about Expedition Bigfoot, or is it more like Mountain Monsters type territory? Because there's kind of a wide.
These woods are haunted.
Oh,
and there's
okay.
these other little low-key cryptid, you know, but the majority of them are Bigfoot. And so here's these teenage boys, they're running around their trailer. That's a new piece of property out in the middle of nowhere. Bigfoot sees them, chases them. Older brother, he's kind of a dick, gets into the house, shuts the door, leaves the two youngers outside. And he's like, if I open the door, he's in, fend for yourself. So the two younger like get into like a freezer outside that is open, or a glass. Bigfoot's not smart enough to see all of that happening and just go open that freezer or look down. So at times I question some of these experiences, or
yeah, and I think you're right to do that. I mean, I'm kind of biting the hand that feeds me here because I'm on a lot of television shows. Fortunately, these days I'm mostly on the shows where I'm just kind of sitting in a chair giving an opinion on or a background story. But the shows that are quote unquote investigations or stories tend to be a little bit dramatic. And I'll tell you, I've been on TV now since 20 years. I've been on a bunch of TV shows on all the networks that you talked about. Back when I started, I was on a show called Monster Quest back in like the early 2000s. And in that show, there was an investigation, and I was part of that a lot of the time. And there would be an actual situation where you're out running around in the woods at night, and suddenly you hear something or see something, and you just for a split second you go, "What's that?" And then that's when they would traditionally cut to the commercial, and then they come back, and it's like, "Oh, it's just a rabbit," or whatever, and it's just kind of like it resolves itself. Like, later on, I was on a TV show called Missing in Alaska in 2015, where I'm honestly convinced that the producers and the networks were trying to deceive the investigators a little bit, because we told them we weren't going to be involved in any types of hoaxing or fabrication or anything goofy like that. But as one producer told me, well, nobody's going to watch a show where nothing happens. Which is a lot of research that we do is basically nothing happening, right? You're just out in the woods. So they had to kind of invent sometimes on these shows little things that will create a little bit of excitement for the audience at home. So, not real happy about that per se. I would never willingly be involved in faking or fabricating any of that stuff. I will also say something culturally about the Travel Channel specifically, which you mentioned. Travel Channel is a subsidiary of Discovery Channel. And Discovery and Travel Channel have, since the beginning of the Josh Gates era, kind of engaged in these more like and I've met Josh, and I have nothing, really negative to say about him. He's a nice guy and he's funny and stuff. But famously, a lot of those shows like Destination Truth, where he started with, was a lot of they found something, oh no, drama and this and that. And that's kind of, I guess, a thread that's continued on some of these shows in terms of having a little bit too much being experienced or found, So, but it does, it's a double-edged sword. It makes for good television. And I guess if you want people to watch a TV show about Bigfoot or hunting ghosts or whatever, you have to have some excitement. You can't just have a bunch of people sitting around in the woods or in a haunted house for an hour where nothing's happening. People aren't going to watch that show. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, which are shows like Mountain Monsters and maybe the one you mentioned, which is real just high drama. Like there's a Bigfoot at every corner. There's something chasing you through the woods. I hope that most people recognize that those shows are just largely, dramatic and not necessarily real research. So.
Yeah, they're geared more for the entertainment. Yes. Instead of the real stuff.
Anybody that spent time hunting anything knows that the majority of your time is just sitting there.
Yes.
It's kind of like a home project. Nobody's home project gets done in a half an hour episode, right? There's always things that happen, but hunting of anything, fishing of anything, you're spending hours doing nothing, weeks, months, years doing nothing for that one bit of something. So
It's true. Yeah.
Now, I've recently started seeing online, and I did ask Greg last week about it, and I'm like, ooh, let's ask Ken. I'm starting to see in social media this theory where they're taking the map of human disappearances in national forests, where we don't find the person, we don't find the body, we find no evidence of them whatsoever. And then the maps of Bigfoot sightings, and these maps are almost identical. And so they're like, are they being taken by Bigfoot? Are, like why and how are they so similar? And that's where then that theory started popping in of like interdimensional. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. We haven't really covered every square inch, right? But, like, is this a more valid theory than I'm giving it credit for?
Well, again, I'm not an advocate of that theory. That tends to tie in with a lot of the people that are prone to believe in conspiracy theories. The government's hiding it, the military knows, or whatever, the National Park Service. I would say that there is obviously a correlation between people vanishing, which is largely in national parks, and Bigfoot sightings, because they're typically in remote areas where people vanish. I mean, as I mentioned, I did a show called Missing in Alaska, which was largely based on people that had vanished in the wilderness of Alaska. It was kind of a precursor to the show called Alaska Triangle, which kind of took the same idea. But while filming a specific episode there, I slipped on a rock crossing a stream and I broke my ankle.
Ooh.
And I had in two places, and I had to be rescued off the mountain and taken down to an emergency room in Seward or wherever I was nearby. Now, if I had been alone up there and that had happened, I probably would have died, and perhaps my remains would have never been found because a bear would have eaten me or something. So Alaska, a lot of these wilderness areas are very dangerous. People slip and fall. They're, they get off trail and they die of, hypothermia, or they, heat exhaustion or whatever. And so I think, yes, people vanish in areas where there's a lot of treacherous wilderness and a very challenging habitat. That doesn't mean there's a connection. I think if Bigfoots and Sasquatches were killing people or eating people or abducting people, I think we would know that by now. I don't think it would be like this ambiguous thing, like, is this happening? I think there would be eyewitness accounts of people, seeing this happen. And the other thing I'll say is that most accounts of Bigfoots or Sasquatches, they do tend to move away from humans, which kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, these avoidance behaviors. They don't want to be around us. Even though they're bigger and more powerful and scarier than we are, they tend to move away from humans. That's the cycle. I even know, and I've spoken to a couple of witnesses that were chased by these things. And I'm convinced that these chases were actually just kind of demonstrative territorial bluff charges, like great apes will do, because in the case of one eyewitness, the guy said this thing moved so fast, but it couldn't catch me for whatever reason. And in fact, at one point I ran out of breath and I stopped because I couldn't run anymore. And I looked back and the Bigfoot stopped and it waited for me to start running again before it started running. So it seems like these things are demonstratively aggressive in terms of they throw rocks, they scream, they make noises, they bang on things, and that all seems to be geared towards just chasing us away, not necessarily trying to kill us or abduct us or anything like that. So again, this is a psychological thing, I think, where some people have a tendency to want to what I call monsterize Bigfoot and other cryptids. They're not just animals that are running around, they're monsters, they're out to get us. So
I would be the one getting in trouble for feeding the wild animals because I would be like, I want to share my snacks with you.
Yeah. Then you have people writing, romance books about Bigfoot. And I'm like, I don't know if I can get into that one, especially after you're like, yeah, they've been seen eating trash. And I'm like, well, that makes dating awful.
That matches
they smell bad too, right?
Yeah.
Supposedly they smell really bad. So
yeah. How lonely do you have to be out in the woods to be like, Bigfoot's hot?
I mean, that could be my next chapter because, it can't be any worse. But, think about Sasquatch trying to find a mate or, Sasquatch dating if you want, but I would go with mating. It's hard enough as a human, right? We have all these things, so it's reasonable that they're migrating everywhere they need to go to try to keep their population. And even bears, right? Bears will walk 20 miles in a day just because, whether it's food or, new territory, whatever. And so you take something the size of Sasquatch, it's totally reasonable to, not keep tabs, just have them passing through nomadic and.
Yeah. Like I said, we don't know. I just, my opinions are based on as much as scientifically as I can be, the evidence and the data. I try to keep my beliefs and my hopes and my wishes and dreams out of it because I don't think that's a very scientific way to look at it. But we have to be open-minded. I'm not saying, I've told many people on the Bigfoot woo, on the kind of the woo Bigfoot side, if I saw a Bigfoot coming out of another dimension, a portal, then I would immediately acknowledge, okay, you're right. That's what I do. But I just haven't, experienced the evidence from that. And I haven't found enough evidence of that. But we don't know. It's all speculation at this point. Only 1 in 5 people thinks there's any chance that Bigfoot might actually exist. Only about 20% of the population at large, based on surveys, thinks that Bigfoot could exist. So, it's a pretty unbelievable concept to most people, and I understand why that is.
Now, I just went to go to Amazon to go look for your books to let people know what titles to look for. And now I'm curious because the first one that pops up is Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. And I'm like, and it looks like it's a pterodactyl. I was expecting more of like a Mothman. With his little booty cheeks. So are the flying monsters as prevalent and popular as like Bigfoot, Loch Ness, Mothman?
No, not really. They're very rare, but I started researching accounts of big birds or so-called thunderbirds, 25, 30 years ago. That's how I got into the field. And I've interviewed, again, hundreds of people that swear that they've seen massive winged creatures with wingspans, 15, 20 feet across, man-sized height, not the Mothman, no glowing red eyes and, some of the things that the Mothman has been attributed to do. But just basically there's 2 categories of descriptions, either giant birds that look very much like vultures or eagles with a huge wingspan, dark feathers, hooked beak, and that, by the way, pertains very much to many Native American traditions of so-called thunderbirds or super eagles that are very prevalent across the continent. And then the other type is more of like the pterodactyl or pterosaur, a winged reptile with bat-like wings and teeth, or a head crest and different things. There were things that looked like both of those types in the past. In terms of the pterodactyls, they supposedly went extinct 66 million years ago. In terms of giant birds with 15-foot wingspans, they were here in North America until the end of the Ice Age, about 11,000 years ago. But They're different from the Mothman because people don't typically attribute these things with supernatural abilities. The Mothman, I've investigated and written about that too, but that definitely seems to be more of a metaphysical or a supernatural phenomenon than anything flesh and blood. But they're not as prevalent as nearly as prevalent as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or, to your point, the lake monsters that have been reported. Those seem to be reported much more frequently.
Do you think that's because humans, right? We, even in retail, the rule is we're eye level. We don't look up as much. We don't look down. So is it because, lake monsters, Bigfoot, they're on our level that we exist? We're not up flying around, right? So do you think that psychologically that's more reason why we're going to notice those things more often?
People don't look up as much these days. That's very true. And in fact, the eyesight of most people these days is right about here. So we're probably not even going to see a Bigfoot or a Nessie if they pop up in front of us because we're scrolling on our social media feeds. But people don't look up in the sky much. That's true. I don't really look up in the air as much as I should, even though I'm a Thunderbird researcher. I should be looking up all the time, but I don't really do that. So I don't know. There's far less evidence for the big birds than Bigfoot or the lake monsters. We don't have really any alleged photographs. There's one controversial video. We don't have giant. Oh, actually, I was going to say we never have any giant feathers, but a lady contacted me this past year with a giant feather she found in Illinois years ago, and it hasn't been identified. It's huge. It's friggin' huge feather. So you have at least one feather that's interesting. No giant nests, no giant eggs, no giant piles of bird crap on cars. So it seems to be very little evidence. It's all eyewitness accounts, but I've interviewed dozens of people that swear that they've seen these winged creatures, and they seem very sincere and credible. So who knows?
Interesting. It was like, and if you live in Ohio, where we hardly ever get sunshine, even if they were flying above you, you're not going to see it because it's cloudy.
Same here in Buffalo area. We're snowing for no reason.
You shush your mouth with that S word. Do not beckon that upon us. But yeah, interesting. So on Amazon, if you put in Ken's name, you will see Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters, and then also a menagerie of mysterious beast encounters with cryptid creatures. If our friends are local to Ohio and are able to come to Parapsychon, do you have copies of these books, people can?
Absolutely. I'll have copies of all of my books available, and I'm happy to autograph them with no extra charge. So, and certainly if people come out to Parapsychon, I'm happy. I'll be doing a presentation on Nessie, Bessie, which is Ohio's kind of lake monster from Lake Erie there, and other aquatic cryptid creatures. So I'll be talking about aquatic cryptids at Parapsychon, but I'm always happy to engage with people if they want to talk about Bigfoot or Mothman or any of these other cryptids.
Okay. Oh, Melanie's like, why are you downing Mothman? I don't think you're downing Mothman. I think you were just separating him from cryptid versus paranormal, right?
Yeah, that's it. Just a different category based on my research. It doesn't seem to be a flesh and blood, but I think there's a validity to it. I mean, it just I don't understand what it could be.
I mean, there's a lot of birds that do nest in caves and like rock crevices. And
stuff. That's true.
It's really rational that he doesn't have a nest. I mean, I definitely pulled over in the middle of a throughway. I mean, safely in Florida the first time I saw a wood stork. So like, what is that giant thing that looks so prehistoric? Like, where did that come from? So I like totally. I mean, I've seen lots of other birds. I've just never seen a wood stork, and they're pretty big. So I mean,
yeah,
there's got to be other big things out there that we just don't know that are staying, or things like oh my gosh, the name just left me. The birds that circle for literally for years, they don't ever land. Albatross, right? Like they just land. I mean, that's kind of cool to see. So rare to see. Those are really rare to see too. So you don't know. I mean, there's definitely things out there that we don't know about or have rare sightings of. And
absolutely, it's a big world, and much of it is still unexplored. So
mermaids.
I think it gives hope to those of us that kind of seeking these things. That maybe some of them will be found eventually.
I almost hope we don't, right? Because we humans, we wreck so much nature. And I'm like, once we find it, we're going to want to stick it in a zoo. We're going to want to, wreck its habitat. So there's a part of me that I'm like, nah, just leave them alone. Just leave it be.
Maybe that's
there's a reason why. There's a reason why they're avoiding us.
Right. Me too. But I mean, maybe that's their way of helping us, keeping us in nature, keeping us entranced in something else besides media and politics and all that stuff. That's their little mysterious way of keeping us distracted for better things.
Absolutely.
Well, I do believe Ken has another appointment that he needs to get to, correct? So
Yes.
I think if there's any last minute questions, you may want to put it out there before we close up.
Yes. I was like, I know Ken's busy. Kathy, you're I'm sure OSR is trying to get a hold of you right now too. It's like
they're always trying to get a hold of me.
But I thank you, Ken, for being able to join us.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Good questions. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, I can't wait to see you next month.
Same here. I'm really looking forward. I had a great time last year, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Great event.
Is Ken upstairs or downstairs? Is he down in the hallway? Or
Ken he's in the cell block.
Okay. So I know where to come find him and be like, hi, face to face. Thank you for that. All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming in. So we'll go ahead and close out. And again, thank you, Ken and ladies, for joining me for our Wednesday Woo Woo Talk. And hope everybody has a great week. Enjoy the sunshine if you're Ohio-ish before it disappears on us. But thanks, guys. We'll see everybody next week.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, all. Thanks for listening. All righty. Bye.